Since the dawn of multiracial democracy in South Africa in 1994, this country's native black population has exploded in terms of numbers, and it has become so prominent in South Africa that even though our economy is failing and we have very few opportunities left for native South Africans, millions of illegal migrants from the rest of Africa have come here seeking whatever opportunities they can find which do not exist in their home nations. Now, the reason that South Africa is poor, actually, there's many reasons, but it boils down to one primary cause. For the past 3 decades of African National Congress rule, South Africa has been swallowed by a culture of dependence. Because you see, due to South Africa's colonial and apartheid history, the African National Congress has been able to convince several generations of blacks that the ANC is essentially the parent of everyone in this country, and that every good thing that black people in South Africa have has been granted to them through the generosity and the strength of the African National Congress. Now, this is possible because, fundamentally speaking, the African National Congress is a communist movement. That is why they were banned by the apartheid government. And Nelson Mandela did not go to prison for fighting apartheid. He went to prison because he knowingly caused the deaths of innocent civilians through acts of terrorism and violence. This is not an element of our history that the ANC wants to admit to because everything in their history has been colored and propagandized to present them in the best light possible. But they are the reason for this country's downfall, and they remain so, regardless of whatever lies they tell or promises they make. So, on the culture of dependence, there are some things to say. You see, the mindset of dependence that exists in South Africa is now so deeply rooted that millions of South Africans don't even try to better themselves. I know this because I have spent many hours in social welfare offices as a quadriplegic with extremely limited economic opportunities. So I have seen the kind of people that exist and that frequent those places. And I can tell you, the vast majority of people in South Africa now claiming social welfare grants aren't people like me with severe physical disabilities that limit their capacity to work. No, these are average people, usually women, usually pregnant women, who procreate with no thought for the future. I know that this is a blunt and kind of a harsh thing to say, but it is true. Because so many blacks now believe that the state is their parent and that it is the state's job to make sure that they survive, that it is difficult to see how South Africa could ever pull itself out of this mess. Because the culture of dependence essentially does turn even adults into essentially overgrown infants who are unable to do anything for themselves and unable even to think independently for themselves. Many people in South Africa can be bought with some fancy speeches by politicians, a branded t shirt from the ANC or the party of their choice, because it's not always the ANC. There are also offshoots, which are ideologically identical, but just more openly radical, such as Julius Malema's Economic Freedom Fighters and Jacob Zuma's Umkhonto weSizwe Party. Now, there are slight differences between, for instance, the Economic Freedom Fighters and the Umkhonto weSizwe Party, because the Economic Freedom Fighters are a much more urbanized and um, ideologically communist movement. They openly refer to themselves as Marxist Leninists. And so they take, ironically enough, for black radicals who claim to hate the white man, they take all of their ideological thinking from a European worldview, which has failed everywhere it's been tried. Jacob Zuma's Umkhonto weSizwe Party is different in that Jacob Zuma's main aim is to return South Africa to a more tribal and nativist culture. He does not, by he, I mean Jacob Zuma specifically, does not respect Western law, and one of his primary goals is actually to abolish our current constitution and replace it with what he calls tribal customary law. The main problem with this being that to this date I'm not aware of any codified system of tribal law, because in practice, and I have seen this happen as a lifelong South African, tribal law can be boiled down to you do whatever the strongest guy tells you to do. And so you can see why someone like Jacob Zuma, who was once president of South Africa when he was still a member of the ANC before his ousting, would want this country to return to a more basic tribal way of life, because Jacob Zuma is a well respected Zulu elder. He is almost considered to be royalty. So it would behoove him, his family, and his friends to have tribal values return, because he would be rich and unquestioned in his leadership. But he has a kind of disdain for progress and modern life and modern comforts. It's almost as if he envisions himself as a kind of modern day Shaka Zulu. For those of you who are unaware, Shaka Zulu is one of the most influential figures in South African history and was the leader who, through violent conquest, essentially forged the Zulu nation into what it is today from its beginnings as just one of many small clans. And so this is the kind of power that Jacob Zuma craves. Julius Malema, as I said earlier, is essentially just a communist. But he is a communist, like all communist leaders before him, who does not actually believe in what he's saying. Communism and its rhetoric and its aims are simply useful vehicles for his own self-enrichment, because Julius Malema has never actually done anything of any value to his supporters. He has made many promises, including a promise to build a high quality primary school for poor black children, which has never to this date materialized. And even when he made that promise, he said that if the EFF failed to build this school that they were going to give to the people, then no one should take them seriously because they don't know what they are doing. And yet, even though that school remains non existent, the EFF continues apace. And so it is because of all this mess, and because the average South African often is incapable of independent thought and realizing when they are being lied to, that South Africa continues to be stuck in these doldrums of poverty, deprivation, and hopelessness. This country doesn't have to be poor. It doesn't have to be backwards. It doesn't have to be essentially a violent hellhole. It is kept this way by politicians who benefit from that very violence and their followers who are too stupid to realize that they are being duped.